The champagne flute trembled in my hand as I stood alone near a marble column, watching Manhattan's elite drift past me, as if I didn't exist. Crystal chandeliers washed the room in gold, making the women's jewelry flash, like tiny explosions of light. I'd borrowed this black dress from my roommate. It fit well enough, but I could feel how cheap the fabric was, compared to the silk and satin whispering around me. Every woman here spoke the secret language of wealth. The precise tilt of the chin, the exact pressure of a handshake, the effortless confidence of knowing you belonged. I was fluent in none of it. More champagne? A server glided past without waiting for my answer, already angling toward a cluster of women, whose laughter chimed like delicate bells. I set my glass on a passing tray and pressed myself closer to the column. My boss, Vivienne Hartley, had insisted I attend this charity gala for the children's hospital where I worked as a grant coordinator. Networking, she'd said, as if the word alone could transform me into someone who belonged here. 3 hours in, I'd collected exactly 0 business cards and survived exactly 0 conversations that lasted longer than polite acknowledgement. The Plaza Hotel's ballroom stretched before me like a cathedral of exclusion. I recognized faces from magazines, a tech mogul laughing too loudly, a socialite whose plastic surgery had erased everything interesting about her face, a politician whose hand lingered too long on his assistant's lower back, and then there was the corner, where the dangerous money gathered. Men in perfectly tailored suits, names spoken softly, business conducted in rooms without windows. I shouldn't have been looking at them, but my gaze kept drifting to the group near the eastern windows, where the city glittered behind them like a kingdom they owned. And at the center of that constellation stood a man who made everyone else blur slightly out of focus, Rafael Caputo. Even I knew the name, though I'd never seen him in person. The tabloids called him a business magnate, a real estate developer, polite euphemisms. For what everyone actually knew, he was younger than I expected, probably close to my age, with dark hair swept back, from a face that could have been carved from Renaissance marble, if Renaissance sculptors had understood cruelty. He wore his tuxedo like armor, and when he moved, the crowd adjusted instinctively, stepping aside without ever seeming to notice. I forced myself to look away. Men like him didn't exist in the same universe as women like me. I was here to survive the night, collect my participation trophy from Vivienne, and go back to my shoebox apartment in Queens, where I belonged. Alessia. Vivienne's voice cut through my thoughts. She appeared at my elbow, her silver dress reflecting light like a knife. You're lurking. I didn't bring you here to lurk. I've been mingling. The lie tasted stale. You've been hiding. She scanned the room with predatory efficiency. See that group by the auction table? The woman in red owns 3 hospitals in Connecticut. Introduce yourself. Tell her about our literacy program. My stomach clenched. Vivienne, I'm really not. If you want to keep working in nonprofit development, you need to learn how to ask for money without apologizing for existing. She squeezed my shoulder, her nails pressing through the fabric. Go, now. She vanished into the crowd before I could protest further. I stood frozen, watching the woman in red hold court among a circle of admirers. Everything about her screamed power. The way she gestured with her champagne glass, the diamond choker at her throat that probably cost more than my annual salary. The casual cruelty in how she dismissed a server who'd brought the wrong hors d'oeuvre. I couldn't do it. I couldn't walk over there and pretend I had anything to offer her world. Instead, I turned toward the terrace doors, thinking I could slip outside for air. Maybe collect myself enough to make one attempt at networking before calling it a night. I'd made it 3 steps when someone's shoulder slammed into mine hard enough to send me stumbling sideways. Champagne from someone's glass splashed across my chest, cold and shocking. Watch it. The woman who'd hit me didn't even look back, just kept walking with her entourage, their chuckles floating behind them like poisoned perfume. I stood there, champagne dripping down the front of my dress, the wet fabric clinging to my skin. A few people glanced over, their expressions ranging from pity to amusement to complete indifference. No one moved to help. I was a piece of scenery that had malfunctioned, nothing more. Heat burned behind my eyes, but I refused to cry. Not here, not in front of these people. I pressed through the crowd toward what I hoped was a bathroom, keeping my head down and my arms crossed over the wet stain spreading across my dress. The hallway beyond the ballroom was blissfully empty, all marble and gilt and blessed silence. I found a ladies' room and pushed inside, grateful for the temporary refuge. The mirror confirmed what I'd felt. I looked like someone who'd been marked for humiliation. The champagne had turned the cheap black fabric slightly gray, and my careful makeup had smudged around my eyes. I grabbed paper towels and tried to blot the worst of it, but the fabric just spread the wetness around, making the stain larger. Perfect, I whispered to my reflection. Absolutely perfect. I couldn't go back out there. Vivian would be furious, but I'd text her some excuse about feeling sick. It wasn't even a lie. My stomach seethed with embarrassment and anger. At myself for coming. At Vivian for insisting. At the casual cruelty of people who could ruin your evening without even noticing they'd done it. I threw the damp paper towels in the trash and pushed back out into the hallway. Except I'd gotten turned around somehow, because this corridor didn't lead back to the ballroom. It stretched toward a set of double doors I didn't recognize, with two men in dark suits standing on either side like sentries. Before I could retreat, the doors opened, and a group emerged. 5 men in expensive suits, talking in low voices. And in the center of them, dominating the space without effort, was Rafael Caputo. I froze. They were walking directly toward me, and there was nowhere to hide, no way to disappear gracefully. I pressed myself against the wall, hoping they'd pass by without registering my existence. They almost did. The group was maybe 10 feet away when one of the men, broader than the others, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, said something in rapid Italian. The others laughed, and Raphael's gaze swept the hallway. His eyes locked on mine. The world swayed slightly. I'd thought he was striking from across the ballroom, but this close he was overwhelming. His eyes were so dark they looked black in the hallway lighting, with the kind of intelligence that felt like being dissected. He didn't smile, didn't acknowledge me beyond that single moment of eye contact that seemed to last several heartbeats too long. Then his attention shifted to something one of his companions said, and the group continued past me. I exhaled, my shoulders dropping, relief pouring through me. I'd made it 5 steps toward the safety of the main corridor when I heard his voice. Wait. The word wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority. The kind of voice that expected obedience and received it without question. I told myself he couldn't be talking to me. I kept walking. You in the black dress? My feet stopped moving before my brain consciously decided to obey. I turned slowly, my heart beating fast, pressed to my chest. Rafael Caputo stood 15 feet away, his companions watching me with expressions ranging from curiosity to calculation. He studied me with the same intensity he'd shown in that first glance, and I felt suddenly, acutely aware of my ruined dress, my smudged makeup, how utterly out of place I was. Come here, not a request. My legs carried me forward through sheer force of survival instinct. You didn't refuse men like Rafael Caputo, not if you had any sense of self-preservation. I stopped at a careful distance away, close enough to be compliant, far enough to maintain some illusion of dignity. Up close, I could see the subtle signs of violence that money couldn't quite erase. A thin scar along his jawline, the slightly crooked set of his nose that suggested it had been broken and healed imperfectly. The way his hands stayed loose at his sides in the posture of someone who'd learned to fight before learning to negotiate. What's your name? His voice was smooth, almost gentle, which somehow made it more dangerous. Alessia. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Alessia Moretti. Something flickered in his expression. Interest, maybe, or recognition of the Italian surname. You work for Vivian Hartley, the Children's Hospital Foundation. It wasn't a question. Heat crept up my neck. How did you... I make it my business to know who's in my city. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something dark and expensive with notes of bergamot and smoke. His gaze traveled down to the champagne stain on my dress, then back up to my face. Someone marked you. The casual observation sent ice down my spine. It was an accident. No. He said it with absolute certainty. It was a message. They're teaching you that you don't belong. He tilted his head slightly, studying me like I was a puzzle he hadn't decided whether to solve or discard. Are you going to accept the lesson? I should have said yes. Should have nodded, backed away, and found the nearest exit. But something in his tone, the assumption that I would fold, that I was as weak as everyone else here seemed to think, sparked anger in my chest. I don't need lessons from people whose biggest accomplishment is being born rich. The words were out before I could stop them. The men behind Raphael went absolutely still. One of them, the scarred one, made a subtle movement toward his jacket, but Raphael raised one hand slightly, and they all relaxed. Then, impossibly, he smiled. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines without making him any less dangerous. Interesting. He turned to his companions and said something in Italian too fast for me to follow. They dispersed immediately, melting back toward the ballroom with the coordinated efficiency of a military unit, leaving me alone in the hallway with Raphael Caputo, whose smile had faded, but whose attention remained fixed on me. Walk with me, Alessia Moretti. He started down the corridor without waiting for my agreement. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But I'd come this far, and something, pride, curiosity, or possibly stupidity, made me follow him deeper into the hotel's private corridors, away from the safety of crowds and witnesses, into whatever the outcome. We walked in silence through hallways that grew progressively quieter, more isolated. Raphael moved with the confidence of someone who owned not just buildings, but the very air inside them. I struggled to keep pace, my borrowed heels clicking against marble that probably cost more per square foot than my monthly rent. He pushed through an unmarked door that led to a private room I hadn't known existed. A small library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather furniture that smelled of old money, and windows overlooking Central Park. The city glittered below us like strewn diamonds. Raphael crossed to a bar cart and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He held one out to me. I didn't take it. What is this? Whiskey, 30-year-old Macallan. He set the glass on the table beside me when I didn't move. You're afraid of me. I'm being cautious around a man who pulled me into a private room. Smart. He took a slow sip from his own glass, his eyes never leaving my face. But if I wanted to hurt you, we wouldn't be having a conversation. The statement should have terrified me. Instead, it clarified something. I was here because he'd chosen to have me here, which meant he wanted something. And people who wished to do things could be negotiated with. I picked up the whiskey and took a careful sip. It burned beautifully down my throat, warming me from the inside. Why am I here? Because you're the first person at that circus downstairs who said something true. He settled into one of the leather chairs with unconscious grace, gesturing for me to sit. Everyone else is performing, pretending, playing elaborate games of status and submission. But you looked at me and saw exactly what I am. A criminal? His smile returned, sharper this time. A man who doesn't pretend civilization is anything but a skinny coat of paint. I sat on the edge of the opposite chair, keeping my spine straight, my hands steady around the whiskey glass. That doesn't explain what you want from me. Direct. I like that. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, the motion bringing him into my space without actually touching me. I need someone for a particular role. Someone who doesn't belong to this world, who isn't corrupted by its politics, who can move through certain spaces without raising suspicion. My heart rate accelerated. I'm not interested in whatever illegal. Nothing illegal. He cut me off with quiet authority. I need a date. I blinked. Of all the things I'd expected him to say, that wasn't on the list. A date. My mother is hosting a series of events over the next 6 weeks. Family gatherings, charity functions, business dinners. She's been aggressively trying to match me with suitable women from appropriate families. He said the words with the kind of disdain usually reserved for discussing vermin. I need someone to play the role of girlfriend convincingly enough that she stops. I laughed before I could stop myself. You're joking. I don't joke about my mother. He took another sip of whiskey, watching me over the rim of his glass. 6 weeks. You attend events with me as my companion. We present a united front, and when the time period ends, we part ways amicably. You'll be compensated, of course. Compensated how? $50,000, plus a wardrobe appropriate to the role, which you keep afterward. Plus, I can open any doors for your career. Vivian Hartley's foundation has been trying to get a meeting with the Caputo Family Trust for 2 years. That happens if you agree. The number hit me like a bucket of cold water. $50,000. That was more than I made in a year. That was student loans paid off. That was stability. That was breathing room I hadn't had since graduating college. But it was also wild. Why me? There are probably hundreds of women who would want something permanent. Who would see this as an audition for the real role? He set his glass down with a soft click. You don't want me, Alessia. You don't want this life. That's precisely why you're perfect. When this ends, you'll walk away without looking back. No complications, no drama, just business. I should have said no. Every rational cell in my body screamed that getting involved with Rafael Caputo, even in a fake relationship, was dangerous in ways I couldn't fully anticipate. But the exhaustion of living paycheck to paycheck, of watching other people float through life while I struggled for every inch of ground, it made me reckless. 60,000, I heard myself say. And the meeting with your family trust happens before the 6 weeks end, not after. I'm not trusting you to follow through when you don't need me anymore. His expression didn't change, but a change occurred in his eyes. Respect, maybe. Or amusement at my audacity. 60,000. Meeting within 3 weeks. But you follow my lead at every event. No improvising. No going off script. This only works if it's believable. And if your mother figures out we're faking? She won't, because we're going to be very, very convincing. He stood and extended his hand. Do we have a deal? I looked at his hand, tanned, strong, with scars across the knuckles that told stories I probably didn't want to know. This was the moment. I could stand up, walk away, go back to my safe, small life, and pretend this conversation never happened. Or I could take the most significant risk I'd ever taken and see where it led. I stood and clasped his hand. His grip was firm and warm, sending an unexpected jolt of electricity up my arm. Deal. Good. He didn't let go immediately. First event is tomorrow night. Family dinner at my mother's estate in Greenwich. I'll send a car for you at 5. Dress formal but not flashy. Conservative. She's old-fashioned about women. Tomorrow? Panic fluttered in my chest. That's not enough time to... You'll be fine. He released my hand, and the absence of contact felt strangely significant. All you need to do is smile, be polite, and look at me like you find me tolerable. Think you can manage that? I lifted my chin. I can fake tolerate anyone for $60,000. That surprised a genuine laugh out of him, low and rich. We're going to get along just fine, Alessia Moretti. He walked me back through the hallways, this time taking routes that kept us away from the main ballroom. We emerged near the plaza's entrance, where the valet stand bustled with departing guests. Raphael signaled, and within seconds, a black Mercedes pulled up, its windows tinted dark enough to hide anything happening inside. The driver stepped out, the same scarred man from earlier, and opened the rear door without speaking. Marco will take you home, Raphael said. Text me your address. And Alessia? He waited until I looked at him. Don't tell anyone about our arrangement. Not your roommate, not Vivienne, no one. This only works if people believe it's real. I nodded, suddenly aware of how completely I was entering his world, with all its secrets and shadows. I slid into the car's leather interior, and Marco closed the door with a solid thunk that felt like sealing a pact. As we pulled away from the plaza, I looked back through the rear window. Raphael stood on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, watching the car disappear into Manhattan traffic. The city lights cast him in alternating shadow and gold, making him look like something from a myth. Beautiful and dangerous and utterly inhuman. What had I just agreed to? The question haunted me the entire drive to Queens, through the transfer of my number to Marco's phone, and through his silent departure after walking me to the entrance of my building, as if I were something precious that needed protecting. I climbed 5 flights of stairs to my apartment, my mind spinning through everything that had happened. Inside, my roommate Sophie was asleep on the couch, a nursing textbook open on her chest. I covered her with a blanket and went to my room, where I sat on my bed in my ruined dress and stared at my phone. I had Rafael Caputo's number. In less than 24 hours, I was going to meet his mother and pretend to be his girlfriend. And somehow, impossibly, I'd negotiated my way into $60,000 and a career opportunity that could change everything. I pulled up his contact and typed, "Thank you for tonight." Then deleted it. Too familiar. I tried again, looking forward to tomorrow, too eager. Finally, I settled on address, 847 42nd Street, Apton 4B. Elegant yet subtle, not flashy. Got it. His response came within seconds. "Sleep well, Alessia. Tomorrow you become someone else." I set the phone aside and lay back on my bed. Still wearing the dress. Still smelling faintly of champagne and whiskey and Raphael's cologne. Tomorrow, I will become someone else. The kind of person who dated Mafia bosses and attended family dinners at Greenwich Estates. The type of person who belonged in that world, even if it was all pretend. The champagne stain had dried into a darker shadow across the fabric. I touched it gently, remembering the humiliation of standing in that ballroom, invisible and unwanted. Alessia felt like someone from another lifetime. Tomorrow, I will be Rafael Caputo's girlfriend. And maybe, just maybe, I would learn the secret language of power I'd been searching for all night, even if it was just for 6 weeks. Even if it was all a beautiful, dangerous lie. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. But all I could see was Raphael's face. In that moment, he'd smiled. Dangerous and amused, and looking at me like I was something worth his attention. Like I mattered. It was addictive. And addiction, I was learning, had a way of rewriting all your plans. The next day passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. I called in sick to work, ignoring Vivian's irritated texts about my early departure from the gala. At noon, a package arrived, a garment bag containing a deep navy dress with a modest neckline and a hem that hit just below my knee, paired with nude heels and understated jewelry. A note hidden inside read, "For tonight." The dress fit perfectly, which meant Raphael had somehow assessed my size in those brief moments in the hallway. The thought should have felt invasive, but instead, it thrilled me in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. He paid attention. He noticed details. And he'd chosen something that made me look elegant, without trying too hard, sophisticated without seeming calculated. Sophie noticed the garment bag when she got home from her hospital shift. "Where did that come from?" "Work event," I lied smoothly. "Vivian sent it." "Vivian never sends anything except passive-aggressive emails." Sophie studied me with her nurse's instinct for detecting irregularities. "What's going on with you? You've been weird since last night." "Just tired. The gala was exhausting." I retreated to my room before she could press further, closing the door on her suspicious expression. At precisely 5 o'clock, my phone buzzed, downstairs. I grabbed my purse. Also new, also expensive, also mysteriously perfect, and headed down. The same Mercedes waited at the curb, but this time Raphael sat in the back seat. He wore a charcoal suit with an open-collar white shirt, looking simultaneously relaxed and utterly controlled. When I slid in beside him, his gaze traveled over me in a single assessing sweep. "Perfect," he said. "You look like someone I'd choose, not someone I'd buy." "I'm not sure that's a compliment." "It is. Trust me." Marco pulled into traffic, and Raphael shifted to face me more fully. Ground rules before we arrive. First, physical contact. We need to appear comfortable with each other, so there will be touching. My hand on your back, your arm through mine, possibly my arm around your shoulders. Nothing inappropriate, but constant enough to sell the intimacy. Heat crept up my neck, but I nodded. Okay. Second, backstory. We met 3 months ago at a hospital fundraiser. You were passionate about the literacy program, and I was impressed by your dedication. We've been seeing each other quietly since then because I wanted to keep you separate from my business life until I was certain it was serious. And now it's serious? Now I'm ready for my mother to know about you, which is significant in our family. His expression hardened slightly. She'll test you, probably multiple times tonight. Questions designed to trip you up, observations meant to make you feel inadequate. Don't take the bait. Stay calm, be respectful, but don't let her intimidate you. What if I can't pull this off? You will. He said it with such certainty that I almost believed him. You stood up to me last night when most people would have folded. You negotiated. That takes spine. Just channel that energy tonight. The drive to Greenwich took longer than I expected, giving me time to memorize the details of our fake relationship, his favorite restaurant where we'd had our first real date, the way I took my coffee, the small things couples would know about each other. Raphael fed me information with the efficiency of someone conducting a military briefing, and I absorbed it all, my memory sharpening under pressure. The Caputo estate emerged from the Connecticut landscape, like something out of a film. Stone walls, manicured grounds, a main house that looked more like a palazzo than a residence. Security guards waved us through iron gates without Marco needing to slow down, and we curved up a drive lined with ancient oak trees. My palms were sweating. I wiped them discreetly on my dress. Raphael caught the gesture. Alessia. He waited until I looked at him. Breathe. You're here because I chose you. That means something in this family. They'll be curious, possibly suspicious, but they'll respect the choice. Just follow my lead. Marco opened our door, and Raphael stepped out, then extended his hand to help me. The gesture was courtly, protective, and I realized with a start that he was already performing the role. So I took his hand and let him guide me out, then didn't let go when I stood beside him. His fingers tightened around mine. Approval, maybe, or just reinforcement of the script. We walked to the entrance together, his thumb absently stroking across my knuckles in a gesture that felt far too intimate for something rehearsed. The front door opened before we reached it, revealing a woman in her 60s with Raphael's dark eyes and the kind of beauty that aging hadn't touched so much as refined. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than my car and smiled with the warmth of a cobra assessing prey. Raphael. She kissed both his cheeks, then turned that penetrating gaze on me. And you must be Alessia. Mrs. Caputo, it's an honor to meet you. I extended my hand, grateful when she shook it instead of going for the cheek kiss. I wasn't ready for that level of false intimacy yet. Please call me Francesca. Her accent was pure old-world elegance. Come in, come in. Everyone is eager to meet the woman who's captured my son's attention. She led us through a foyer that belonged in a museum. Marble floors, Renaissance paintings, a staircase that curved upward like something from a fairy tale. But this was no fairy tale. This was a lion's den, and I was about to perform for an audience that would eat me alive if I faltered. We entered a dining room where a long table was already set for 12. People milled around with cocktails, men in expensive suits, women in elegant dresses, all of them turning to assess me as we walked in. The weight of their attention was physical. Raphael's hand moved to the small of my back, warm and steady. Everyone, this is Alessia. The introductions blurred together. Cousins, business associates, family friends, all with Italian names I struggled to keep straight. They shook my hand, kissed my cheeks, and murmured pleasantries while their eyes calculated my worth. I smiled, thanked them for welcoming me, and tried not to think about how completely out of my depth I was. Dinner was formal, ritualistic, with courses appearing and disappearing under the supervision of silent staff. I sat beside Raphael, who kept one hand casually resting on my knee beneath the table, a gesture of possession that also served as grounding. When I felt myself starting to panic under the barrage of questions about my background, my family, and my work, his fingers would gently squeeze, reminding me to breathe. Francesca held court from the head of the table, directing conversation with the skill of a conductor. She asked me about my work at the hospital foundation, my education, and my family's background in a way that felt casual, but was clearly intelligence gathering. "Moretti," she mused. "From where in Italy?" "My grandparents came from Napoli," I said. "But they left when my father was young. I've never been to Italy myself." "Never." She looked genuinely surprised. "Raphael, you must take her. A woman should know her roots." "We've been talking about it," Raphael said smoothly. "Maybe this fall, when her work schedule permits." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily that I almost believed it myself. I glanced at him, and he met my gaze with an expression that was pure performance, affection, pride, the look of a man who'd found something valuable. For a moment, I forgot we were pretending. Dessert arrived, something elaborate with chocolate and gold leaf, and conversation shifted to business. The men dominated this part of the evening, discussing real estate deals and construction projects in deliberately vague terms. I listened, trying to understand the subtext, but mostly I was just grateful the focus had moved away from me. Raphael's cousin Dante, who sat across from me with a predator's smile, suddenly addressed me directly. "So, Alessia, what do you think about Raphael's new development in Red Hook?" I had no idea what he was talking about, but Raphael's hand tightened on my knee in warning. This was a test. I took a slow sip of wine, buying time. "I think Raphael has excellent instincts about the city's growth patterns." Dante's smile widened. "But do you approve? A nice girl who works at a children's hospital? Surely all that construction displacing low-income families must concern you." The trap was obvious now. Either I criticized Raphael's business and seemed disloyal, or I condoned displacement and seemed hypocritical. I set my wine glass down and met Dante's gaze directly. "I think the city's development is complicated, and that pretending it has simple answers is naive. I also think Raphael is the kind of man who finds solutions instead of just identifying problems." I turned to Raphael, softening my expression. "That's why I respect him." Raphael's look held something that looked almost like genuine warmth. "And that's why I respect her." He leaned in and kissed my temple, a gesture so natural and unexpected that I barely managed not to flinch. His lips were warm against my skin, and for a dizzy second, I forgot this was all theater. Then he pulled back, and the moment broke. Dante chuckled and raised his glass. "Interesting choice, cousin. I approve." The rest of dinner passed without further interrogation. When coffee was served, Francesca gestured for the women to follow her to the salon, leaving the men at the table. I glanced at Raphael, panicked, but he gave me a subtle nod. "Go with it." The salon was all silk upholstery and antiques that probably predated the Constitution. Francesca poured small glasses of limoncello, and the other women settled into conversation about summer plans and their children's accomplishments. I perched on the edge of a settee, trying to look like I belonged. Francesca sat beside me, her presence authoritative. "You're nervous." No point denying it. "Yes." "Good. You should be." She took a delicate sip of limoncello. "My son is complicated, dangerous even in ways you probably don't fully understand. But he brought you here, which means you matter to him. So I'll be direct. What do you want from Raphael?" The question caught me off guard with its bluntness. I thought of the $60,000, the career opportunity, all the practical reasons I'd agreed to this charade. But Francesca's eyes were too knowing for lies. "I want to understand him," I said, which was at least partly true. He's different from anyone I've known. Intense and careful at the same time. I want to see who he is when he's not performing power. Something flickered across her face. Approval, maybe, or surprise. Most women want to possess him. You want to understand him. That's refreshing. She patted my hand with fingers heavy with rings. Be careful, dear. Understanding dangerous men has a way of making you dangerous too. Before I could respond, the men rejoined us, Raphael moving directly to my side. Ready to go? Relief flooded through me. Yes. We made our goodbyes, and Francesca kissed both my cheeks this time, whispering, "You did well tonight," into my ear. Then we were back in the Mercedes, pulling away from the estate, and I could finally breathe. Raphael waited until we were through the gates before speaking. You exceeded expectations. Your cousin Dante was testing me. He tests everyone. You handled it perfectly. He shifted in his seat, angling toward me. The thing about my family, they respect strength more than likability. You showed spine tonight. That matters. Your mother said something strange. She said understanding dangerous men makes you dangerous too. My mother is wise. His expression was unreadable in the shadows of the car. Is that what you're doing, Alessia? Trying to understand me? Isn't that what you're paying me for? To understand enough to be convincing? Maybe. He looked out the window at the dark Connecticut landscape streaming past. Or maybe I chose you because you're the first person in years who didn't already have opinions about who I'm supposed to be. The vulnerability in that statement caught me completely off guard. This was Raphael Caputo, Manhattan's most notorious power broker, and he sounded almost lonely. I didn't know what to do with that information, so I filed it away for later examination. We drove back to the city in silence. When Marco pulled up to my building, Raphael walked me to the door despite my protests. Next event is Friday, he said. Charity auction at the Met. I'll send appropriate attire. Thank you for tonight. The dress, the prep, all of it. You're welcome. He hesitated, then reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. A gesture far too intimate for what this was supposed to be. You're good at this, Alessia, he said quietly. Better than I expected. Just remember, it's a performance. Don't get confused about what's real. The warning felt aimed at him, as much as it was at me. Before I could respond, he turned and walked back to the waiting car, leaving me standing in the entrance of my shabby building, wearing a dress that cost more than my rent, my mind spinning with everything that had just happened. Inside my apartment, I collapsed onto the bed without bothering to change. Sophie was on another night shift, so I was alone with my thoughts, and the faint trace of Raphael's cologne, where he'd kissed my temple. It's a performance, I reminded myself. None of it was real. He was paying me to pretend, and I was doing exactly that. But when I closed my eyes, all I could see was the way he'd looked at me, across the dinner table, like I was something precious he'd found and wasn't quite ready to share with the world. And the terrifying thing was, part of me wished it were real. I fell asleep still wearing the navy dress, dreaming of iron gates, dangerous men, and the ghost of warm lips against my temple. The next 3 weeks passed in a surreal blur of events and performances. A charity auction at the Met, where Raphael bid $50,000 on a Rothko and leaned close to whisper, "That's what you're worth to me," while everyone watched. A private dinner at a restaurant without a sign, where senators and judges ate at nearby tables and pretended not to notice his presence. A weekend in the Hamptons, at someone's compound, where I learned the truly wealthy don't own things. They curate experiences. Through it all, Raphael played his role flawlessly. The attentive boyfriend, the careful protector, the man who kept his hand at my back in crowded rooms, who watched me as if I were the only person worth listening to. In public, we were perfect. In private, during the car rides between events, we maintained a careful distance. Except the distance was shrinking. I noticed it in the small things. The way he started texting me during the day about things unrelated to our arrangement, asking my opinion on articles, sharing observations about the city, the way his hand lingered at my waist a moment too long. After we stopped performing, the way I sometimes caught him watching me, with an expression I couldn't quite name. When he thought I wasn't looking, the meeting with the Caputo Family Trust happened in week 3. exactly as promised. Raphael sat beside me during my presentation on the hospital's literacy program, and while he didn't say much, his presence was enough of an endorsement. The trustees approved funding that would keep the program running for 5 years. Vivian called me personally to express amazement at my networking success. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollowed out, as if I were living someone else's life. Friday of week 3, Raphael picked me up for another family dinner, but this time his expression was darker than usual. He was quiet during the drive, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming against his knee in the only sign of agitation I'd ever seen from him. "What's wrong?" I asked. He glanced at Marco in the front seat, then at me. "There's a complication. One of my father's old associates, a man named Salvatore Costa, has been making moves to challenge our family's position. He's dangerous, unpredictable, and he's been asking questions about you." Ice formed in my stomach. "What kind of questions?" "Where you came from, whether you're a weakness he can exploit." Raphael's hand found mine, squeezing tight. "I won't let anything happen to you. But I need you to be careful. If anyone approaches you when I'm not there, anyone at all, you call me immediately." "Raphael, maybe we should stop. If I'm putting you at risk—" "You're not." He said it with such fierce conviction that I believed him. "Costa is testing boundaries. It's what men like him do. But he won't touch you because he knows what I'd do if he tried." The possessiveness in his voice gave me chills. This wasn't the performance we showed the world. This was something rawer, more dangerous. And I realized with dawning horror that the lines between fake and real had blurred without either of us noticing when it happened. That night's dinner was tense. Raphael kept me close, his body language screaming protection. Francesca noticed, her sharp eyes missing nothing, but she didn't comment directly. Instead, after dinner, she pulled me aside into her private office. "Salvatore Costa is a snake," she said without preamble. "He's been circling my family since my husband died, looking for opportunities to strike. Now he's found one, you. I'm not actually—" I stopped myself before finishing the sentence. "I'm not actually Raphael's girlfriend, but Francesca couldn't know that. You're wondering why I'm telling you this." She poured 2 glasses of grappa and handed me one. "Because whether you planned it or not, you've become important to my son. I see the way he looks at you, the way he positions himself between you and the world. That's not strategy. That's something real. That's—" My heart beat rapidly. "You're mistaken." "I'm never mistaken about my children." She took a slow sip, studying me over the rim. "So here's what you need to understand. Being important to Raphael makes you a target. If you care about him, you'll be smart about your safety. And if you don't care about him—" She let the sentence hang, but the threat was clear. "I care about him." The words came out before I could examine whether they were true, but saying them seemed like stepping off a cliff into open air. Francesca's expression softened slightly. "Then be careful, dear, and don't break his heart. Dangerous men have a way of becoming catastrophic when they're hurt." The drive back to the city that night was silent. Raphael stared out the window, lost in thoughts he didn't share. When we reached my building, I expected him to let Marco drop me off as usual. Instead, he got out of the car and walked me upstairs. "You don't have to," I started. "Yes, I do." He waited while I unlocked my apartment door, then followed me inside without asking permission. Sophie was at another shift, so the apartment was empty. Raphael prowled through the small space, checking windows and locks with professional efficiency. When he finished, he turned to face me in my tiny living room, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked uncertain. "I need to tell you something," he said. "This arrangement we made, it's not working the way I planned." My throat went dry. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I can't keep pretending this is just business." He crossed the distance between us in 2 strides, stopping close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "I meant what I said at the Met. You're worth more than what I'm paying you, worth more than this charade. Raphael, let me finish. His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone with aching gentleness. These 3 weeks with you have been the most real thing in my life in longer than I can remember. You see me. Not the power or the money or the fear, just me. And I've never wanted anything the way I want you to keep looking at me like that. My breath caught. This couldn't be happening. This was supposed to be fake, controlled, safe. But the way he was touching me, the raw honesty in his voice, there was nothing fake about it. This is a bad idea, I whispered. You know that. Probably the worst idea I've ever had. His forehead dropped to rest against mine, and I could feel the tension in his body, the restraint it was taking for him not to close the final distance between us. Tell me to leave. Tell me this stays business, and I'll walk out that door right now. I should have said it. It should have protected both of us from the inevitable disaster of crossing this line. But I'd been lying to myself for 3 weeks, pretending my racing heart and sleepless nights were just performance anxiety. Pretending I didn't replay every casual touch, every moment of warmth in his eyes, every second of his attention like they were treasures I could hoard. Instead of speaking, I closed the distance and kissed him. He froze for one heartbeat. Surprise, maybe, or giving me one last chance to take it back. Then his arms came around me, and the kiss deepened into something that erased every careful boundary we'd constructed. He tasted like grappa and danger, and his hands moved over my back like he was memorizing the shape of me. I tangled my fingers in his hair and let myself fall into the catastrophic truth I'd been avoiding. I had fallen completely, irrevocably for Rafael Caputo. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead against mine again. We're doing this. No more pretending. Your mother warned me. She said understanding dangerous men makes you dangerous too. My mother's right. He pulled back enough to look into my eyes. But I think you were always dangerous, Alessia. You just didn't know it yet. He kissed me again, softer this time, and I felt the last of my resistance crumble. We had 3 more weeks in our original arrangement. 3 more weeks to figure out if what we'd found in the performance could survive reality. 3 more weeks before Salvatore Costa or someone else decided to test just how far Raphael would go to protect me. But standing in my apartment with Raphael's arms around me, none of that seemed to matter. For the first time since I'd agreed to this insane arrangement, I wasn't thinking about money, career opportunities, or exit strategies. I was just thinking about how right it felt to be held by someone who saw past all my meticulously built walls to the person underneath. Someone dangerous and damaged and utterly unwilling to let me go now that he'd found me. We stayed like that for a long time, foreheads pressed together, breathing each other's air, balanced on the edge of something that could destroy us both. And I realized with crystal clarity that I didn't care about the danger anymore. I only cared about him. The next 2 weeks were different. We still attended events, still played our roles for his mother and the various observers who tracked Raphael's movements. But now, when his hand found mine in private moments, it wasn't performance. When he pulled me close in the back of the car, pressing kisses to my temple or my hair, it was because he wanted to, not because someone was watching. He started staying later when he dropped me off, sometimes until dawn, just talking. I learned about his childhood, the violence he'd witnessed, the burden of anticipation placed on him as the eldest son, the quiet grief he still carried for his father. He learned about my family's struggles after my mother died, my determination to build something meaningful despite starting with nothing, and my fear that I'd never be enough. You're more than enough, he'd said, tracing patterns on my palm with his fingertips. You're everything. But the shadow of Salvatore Costa grew longer. Raphael assigned one of his men, a quiet, efficient woman named Elena, to accompany me when I went to work. At first I protested, but after noticing the same car following me 3 days in a row, I stopped arguing. Raphael's world was seeping into mine, and resistance felt pointless. The final event of our 6 weeks was a gala at Raphael's own estate, a waterfront property in Brooklyn, with views of Manhattan that took my breath away. It was meant to be a celebration, the culmination of our arrangement. Instead, it felt like walking into a trap. I felt it the moment we arrived. Security was heavier than usual, with Raphael's men posted at every entrance, their expressions screaming threat assessment. Raphael himself was tense, his hand never leaving my back as we moved through the crowd of guests. "Something's wrong," I whispered. "Costa's here, uninvited." Raphael's jaw tightened. "He's making a statement." I scanned the crowd and found him. A silver-haired man in his 60s, with the kind of face that had been handsome before cruelty reshaped it. He stood near the eastern windows with his own entourage, watching Raphael and me with an expression that made my skin crawl. "What does he want?" "To prove I'm weak, that you're a vulnerability he can exploit." Raphael guided me deeper into the ballroom, away from Costa's sightline. "Stay close to me. Don't leave my side for any reason." But an hour into the evening, I excused myself to the restroom despite Raphael's visible reluctance. Elena accompanied me, standing guard outside the door. I'd just finished washing my hands when I heard a scuffle in the hallway. Something hitting the wall, a grunt of pain. I yanked the door open. Elena was on the ground, blood streaming from her nose, and 2 men I didn't recognize stood in the hallway. Before I could scream, one of them clamped a hand over my mouth and dragged me toward a service exit. Terror shot through me like electricity. I bit down hard on the hand covering my mouth, tasting blood, and the man swore. His grip loosened just enough for me to wrench free and run, not toward the ballroom, but toward the stairs leading to the roof. I didn't think, just moved on. Pure survival instinct. Behind me, footsteps pounded. I burst through the roof access door into cold night air, the city sparkling around me like false promises. Nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. The door slammed open behind me, and Salvatore Costa stepped out, flanked by his men. Up close, he was smaller than I'd expected, but the cruelty in his eyes was magnified. "Alessia Moretti." He said my name like a curse. "Do you know what you represent?" Raphael Caputo's greatest weakness. The thing that finally makes him vulnerable. I backed toward the roof's edge, my thoughts spinning for options. "Whatever you think I am to him, you're wrong." "Am I?" He smiled, and it was the most frightening thing I'd ever seen. "Then you won't mind if I remove you from the equation. Either Raphael lets you die, proving you don't matter, or he tears his organization apart trying to save you, proving you're exactly the leverage I need." The roof access door exploded open again, and Raphael emerged like something from a nightmare. Violence barely leashed, his gun already drawn. Behind him, Marco and 6 other men flooded onto the roof, all armed, all moving with lethal precision. "Touch her and die." Raphael's voice was absolutely flat, devoid of emotion in the way that promised unspeakable things. "Those are your only options, Salvatore. Walk away now, or I paint this roof with what's left of you." Costa raised his hands in mock surrender. "So dramatic. I was just having a conversation with your pretty girl, getting to know her. By having your dogs put their hands on her?" Raphael stepped forward, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. Angles, distances. Who would die first if this turned into a firefight? Last chance, walk away. For one breathless moment, the world balanced on a knife's edge. Then Costa smiled again and gestured to his men. They retreated toward the roof access door, moving slowly and keeping their hands visible. "This isn't over," Costa said as he reached the doorway. "You think one woman is worth starting a war?" Raphael's expression didn't change. "I think you testing me again means I haven't made myself clear. Alessia is off limits. Touch her, threaten her, even look at her wrong, and I'll dismantle everything you've built piece by piece while you watch. Then I'll kill everyone you've ever cared about. Then eventually I'll kill you. Are we clear now?" A change occurred in Costa's face, the recognition that Raphael meant every word. He nodded once, then disappeared down the stairs with his men. The moment they were gone, Raphael holstered his gun and crossed to me in 3 strides, his hands framing my face, his eyes scanning me for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I'm fine. My voice broke, adrenaline crashing through my system. He was going to kill me to prove a point. "No." Raphael's hands quivered slightly against my skin, the only sign of how close he'd come to complete violence. "I would have burned this city to ashes before letting him hurt you. Do you understand that? There is nothing, no business, no territory, no peace, that matters more than your safety." The declaration should have terrified me. Instead, it steadied something in my chest. "I love you," I whispered. "I know that's not part of our deal. I know it's insane, but—" He kissed me before I could finish, desperate and claiming and tender all at once. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing. "I loved you the moment you negotiated me up to $60,000. I loved you when you stood up to my mother. I loved you every second since, even when I was trying to convince myself I didn't." Around us, his men had discreetly disappeared back downstairs, giving us privacy. The city glittered below, and somewhere in that sprawl of light and shadow, Salvatore Costa was planning his next move. But up here, in this moment, none of that mattered. "What do we do now?" I asked. "Now?" Raphael tucked me against his chest, one arm wrapped around my shoulders, the other still shaking gently from the violence he'd almost unleashed. "Now, I make it very clear to everyone in this city that you're under my protection, that threatening you is the same as declaring war, and then we figure out what comes next, because our 6 weeks are up, and I'm not letting you go. I don't want you to let me go." "Good." He pressed his lips to my forehead, and I felt the absolute certainty in his body relax slightly. "Because I'm keeping you, Alessia Moretti, for as long as you'll have me." We stood like that on the roof while the party continued below, 2 people who'd stumbled into something real while pretending it's something fake. The danger wasn't over. Costa would regroup, other threats would emerge, and Raphael's world would always carry shadows I'd need to learn to navigate. But I'd stopped being afraid. Somewhere between the Plaza Hotel and this rooftop, I'd transformed from someone who didn't belong into someone who'd claimed her own place in Raphael's dangerous, complicated world. And I'd done it not by changing who I was, but by being exactly myself. Stubborn, determined, and unwilling to accept that love had to be safe to be real. Raphael's phone buzzed, and he pulled it out with visible reluctance. His expression hardened as he read the message. "Costa's formally requested a sit-down. Peace talks." "Is that good?" "It's better than open war." He pocketed the phone and took my hand. "But it means the next few weeks will be delicate. Can you handle that?" I thought about the last 6 weeks, the galas and family dinners, the careful performances and genuine moments, the terror on this roof, and the absolute conviction in Raphael's eyes when he'd promised to destroy anyone who threatened me. I'd survived all of it, thrived in it even. "I can handle anything," I said, "as long as you're honest with me about what we're walking into." "Always." He lifted my hand to his lips, kissing my knuckles with unconscious gallantry. "No more secrets. No more performance. Just us figuring this out together." We went back downstairs to a party that felt different now. I was no longer an outsider pretending to belong, but Raphael Caputo's chosen partner, which came with its own complicated weight. People looked at me differently, spoke to me with careful respect tinged with fear. I'd become dangerous by association, just like Francesca had warned. And the strange thing was, I didn't mind. Francesca found us near the end of the evening, her sharp eyes taking in our joined hands, the protective angle of Raphael's body, the marks on my wrists where Costa's man had grabbed me. She didn't ask what had happened. She already knew. "Welcome to the family," she said to me, and this time it wasn't a threat or a test. It was a simple acknowledgement of reality. Thank you. I met her gaze steadily. I'll take care of him. I know you will. She smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. You're stronger than you look, Alessia Moretti. You'll need to be. After she left, Raphael pulled me onto the dance floor for a song I didn't recognize, something slow and old and impossibly romantic. We swayed together while his world watched, and I realized this was the moment, the one where everything changed completely and irrevocably. What happens with the $60,000? I asked against his chest. What $60,000? He pulled back to look at me, his expression genuinely confused. Our deal, 6 weeks, $60,000. That deal ended the moment you kissed me in your apartment. His hand moved to the small of my back, pressing me closer. Everything after that has been real, which means you don't get paid for being my girlfriend. You get everything else instead. Everything else? Protection, devotion, access to my world and all its complications. He leaned down until his lips brushed my ear. Me, completely and without reservation. Is that enough? I thought about the woman I'd been 6 weeks ago, standing invisible at a gala, desperate to belong anywhere. That woman would have demanded the money, would have insisted on keeping things transactional and safe. But I wasn't here anymore. Somewhere along the way, I'd become someone who could stand on a rooftop with a Mafia boss and demand honesty. Someone who could negotiate with dangerous men and win. Someone who could love without guarantees and call it strength instead of weakness. It's enough, I whispered. It's everything. We danced until the last guests departed, until only his family and closest associates remained, until the servers began clearing tables, and the city outside the windows started its slow climb toward dawn. And through it all, Raphael held me like I was the most precious thing in his universe. Which I was beginning to understand I actually was. 6 weeks ago, I'd been ignored at a party until a Mafia boss pulled me onto his metaphorical lap and offered me a devil's bargain. Now I stood in that same man's arms, not as part of a transaction, but as someone who'd earned her place through fire and courage and stubborn refusal to be anyone but herself. The city sparkled outside, full of people climbing their own mountains, fighting their own battles, searching for their own versions of belonging. And I'd found mine in the most unexpected place, in the arms of a dangerous man who'd seen past my invisibility to the strength underneath. Take me home, I said, though I wasn't sure anymore which home I meant. My apartment in Queens felt like something from another life. Raphael's world had become the place I belonged. He understood without me explaining. Come with me. We left his estate in the familiar Mercedes, Marco driving us through Brooklyn's industrial streets toward the waterfront. But instead of heading to my apartment, we went to a building I didn't recognize. Something sleek and modern with security that made his mother's estate look casual. What is this? I asked as the elevator rose smoothly toward the top floor. My actual home. He squeezed my hand. Not the public estate where I conduct business. This is where I live when I want to be just Raphael, not Raphael Caputo. The penthouse was unexpected. Warm where I'd anticipated cold. Comfortable where I'd expected austere. Books lined one wall, and the furniture looked lived in, rather than showroom perfect. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered across the water like a promise. It's beautiful, I breathed. It's yours. He said it simply, like offering me his home was no more significant than offering coffee. Whenever you want to be here, however often that is. I'm not asking you to move in. Not yet. But I'm asking you to think of this as a place you belong. I turned to face him, this complicated man who'd entered my life like a hurricane and left nothing unchanged. What are we doing, Raphael? I don't know. He pulled me close and I fit against him like we'd been designed for each other. But I want to figure it out. No scripts, no performances, no exit strategies. Just us, navigating this together. Even though it's dangerous, especially because it's dangerous. He tilted my chin up, his dark eyes serious. I spent my whole life being careful, strategic, never letting anyone close enough to matter. And then you showed up in a ruined dress with champagne stains and negotiated me like a business deal, and suddenly nothing else mattered except keeping you in my life. So yes, it's dangerous. Yes, there will be more threats like Costa. But I've never been more certain of anything than I am of this. I reached up and traced the scar along his jawline. That thin, white line that spoke of violence survived. I was invisible before you, standing in that ballroom, watching everyone else matter while I didn't. You made me visible. No. He caught my hand and pressed it against his chest, over his heart. You made yourself visible by refusing to be less than you are. I just recognized what was already there. We kissed then, slow and deep and full of promise. Not the desperate passion of our first kiss, but something more profound. The kiss of two people committing to the complicated, dangerous, beautiful work of building something real. When we finally broke apart, the sky outside was lightening toward dawn. Raphael led me to his bedroom, and we collapsed onto his bed fully clothed, exhausted from the evening's events. He pulled me against his chest, his arms wrapped around me protectively, and I felt safer than I'd ever felt in my life. "Stay," he whispered into my hair. "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered back. And as I drifted toward sleep in Raphael Caputo's arms, I thought about beginnings and endings, about the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become. 6 weeks ago, I'd agreed to play a role. Now I was living my truth, complicated, dangerous, and absolutely real. The city outside continued its endless motion, full of invisible people searching for their moment to be seen. I'd found mine in the last place I'd expected, with the last person I'd thought would understand. But that was the secret, I realized, as sleep finally claimed me. We're all invisible until someone looks close enough to see not just what we show the world, but who we actually are underneath. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, the person who finally sees us is someone worth being seen by. Raphael's breathing evened out against my hair, and I closed my eyes, no longer afraid of what came next. Whatever it was, we'd face it together. And that was more than enough. That was everything.